Hey guys, we are about to wrap up Unit 4. We have this topic, Japan modernizes, and then one more, we're going to look at Latin America, so we are almost there with Unit 4. And our topic today, as it sort of implies, is Japan. And Japan is going to take a very different course than other countries we've seen in Asia and Africa. They're going to become an imperial power themselves. So let's just kind of follow that path forward and see how that occurs. So we're going to look at how Japan transforms itself into an imperial power in Asia. That's our goal for today. Now, just a little bit of kind of lay of the land and a little bit of context here where Japan is. So that's China, that's the Korean Peninsula, there's Japan. And Japan consists of 4 large islands and a lot of smaller islands. The biggest one is called Honshu, and that is where Tokyo, the capital city, is. So just, again, a little bit of reference as to where we're at in the world. So, Japan. Well, they did not start out in a position where it would look like they would become an imperial power, because back in 1603, the Tokugawa family took over Japan. And this led to 2 centuries, basically, of isolation, where the emperor became more or less a figurehead, and Japan was instead led by a shogun, or military dictator. And again, for 200 years, actually more than 200 years, Japan saw itself really disconnected with the rest of the world. The only exception is they would let a Dutch ship in like once a year, basically. But other than that, I mean, Japan is just sealing itself off. And you've got to think, well, okay, they're sealed off. Why would foreigners want to trade with a country that's so far behind? And then you're like, oh, that's right, because they'll buy our stuff. So what happens is America is going to be the country that's going to open Japan to the rest of the world. And the way this happens is basically a naval force under the authority of Commodore Matthew Perry, an American naval officer, arrives in Tokyo, unwelcomed, unannounced, uninvited, all those things, and says, hey, our president would really, really, really like you to trade with us. Now, pointing guns in the direction, I'm sure, adds some emphasis to our desire to trade. And Japan eventually signs a treaty with America, the Treaty of Kanagawa, and this then opens the door to Japan, not just to America, but ultimately really to the rest of the world. And as Japan reopened, it realized, wow, we are falling way behind the rest of the modern industrialized world. I mean, this is the equivalent of freezing America in terms of technology right now for the next 200 years. Can you imagine people in the 2200s, and they would come back and they would look at us and think, gosh, they're so primitive, right? That is kind of the effect Japan has. They're like, wow, we've really got to pick up where we left off and catch up with the rest of the world. So they quickly start building factories and steam engines and steam locomotives and all that stuff. And that moment where Japan kind of flips the switch and becomes a modern country is called the Meiji Restoration. Meiji Restoration. Okay, it's our second big main idea. So the year is 1867. The restoration part refers to the power of the emperor was restored, because the emperor had been basically just kind of a powerless figurehead for years, and now he's back, and he has the power to, put Japan on a course to modernization and industrialization. And so railroads are being built, as I said. They're trading out their traditional military uniforms for Western-style uniforms. And the Japanese were pretty clever in that they decided, if we're going to rebuild and reform our country, let's look at the examples around the world that works. If the Americans are doing something that works, let's do that. If the British are doing something that works, let's do that. It's kind of, why reinvent the wheel when you have good models out there that you can base your reform on? And so in 1889, we're going to see this reform extended beyond just technology to things like politics. A constitution was written. It was modeled on the German constitution, because Germany was an up-and-coming power at this time period. This is going to give absolute power to the emperor. This is going to give the people of Japan limited voting rights and a legislature called the Diet. So again, Japan is modernizing rapidly. They're using, they're going to model their navy on the British, for example. Let's use the best models out there and create a new Japan. Now, as it modernizes, it's going to expand its empire as well. And that is how Japan is unique. So when we think about empire building countries during this time, it's always European or American, right? The British, the French, the Germans, the Dutch, the Americans, whatever. But here we've got a non-Western country doing the same thing. And Japan was eager to show off their new power, to gain respect, because Japan felt like they didn't get respect from European countries. And they wanted to show off, hey, we have battleships too. We have rifles too. We have cannons. All these things the Europeans have, we can do that too. And so how they're going to show off their power is by conquering their neighbors. So who would be Japan's natural rival in East Asia? And it's China. Okay, and so in 1894, China and Japan fight a war. It's called the First Sino-Japanese War. If you're curious what happened with the second one, that's going to come with our study of World War II. It's a war that kind of starts in the 1930s and basically just blends into World War II later. But we're not there yet. We're talking about the 1890s. Japan wins this war. Little Japan defeats giant China. And the reason they're able to do this is they're so much more technologically advanced. Their military is better trained, better equipped. And China was, frankly kind of dysfunctional at this time period. Their empire was, on the verge of collapse anyways. And so as a consequence of this war, Japan is going to take something called Formosa, or we also know it as Taiwan, from China. Now, not to get super far ahead of myself here, but what's going to happen is when World War II comes to an end, Formosa is given back to China. And then China finds itself in a long, bloody civil war, and the communists are going to win that war. And the guys who lost that war, they're called the nationalists, they're going to flee to Taiwan, which is where they're still at today. And Taiwan is something that China still claims. Taiwan basically functions as an independent country, but it's not technically independent because if they declare independence, China has threatened to invade them. All right, that's enough future stuff. Let's get back to the past. So besides China, what other big rival would Japan have in East Asia? And the answer is right next door to them. I'm not talking Korea. I'm thinking about this one right up here, Russia, right? The Russian bear. Okay, so we call this the Russo-Japanese War. This is actually something we've looked at before when we were looking at Russian history in the last unit. This is a war basically over who can control, let me go back to the map here, who is going to have dominance over Korea. All right, is it going to be Russia or is it going to be Japan? And you can see Korea there kind of stuck in the middle between Russia and Japan. Now, if we're looking at these two political cartoons, we definitely get the idea that Russia is feeling a lot of confidence in this war, right? They're big and powerful. They're a big bear that's just going to conquer the Japanese and all that. Here's another example here. This Russian guy punching the Japanese guy, teeth flying and all that. But turns out that Russia was not really prepared for a big war, especially war all the way on the other side of the globe. Because remember, Russia, while it does extend into Asia, most of Russia, in terms of people and industry, lies way west in Europe. And Japan wins this war, and they humiliate the Russians, and it really is a signal to the world that, man, you better take Japan seriously. Like they are a world power now. They've defeated Russia. As a consequence of this war, Japan gains basically power over Korea. So again, the surprise, right? The underdog wins the fight. Japan has defeated Russia. And the world just can't imagine this. Now, the Japanese could be pretty harsh rulers. Wherever they went in and conquered lands, they really did their best to try to stamp out native culture and enforce Japanese ideals and traditions and cultures on the people. And this is something, of course, is going to backfire because all it's going to do is create nationalism among those people who are being ruled so severely. And not to get, again, too far ahead of ourselves, but in World War II, for example, the Japanese are going to do horrible things in Korea. In particular, carry out medical experiments on prisoners, and it's just going to be really, really awful. which is going to explain some animosity between Japan and Korea that's going to continue way after the end of World War II. All right, so that is it, guys, for our topic on Japan modernizing. Remember, they'd gone from a country that had been sealed off from the rest of the world for centuries to a country that is every bit the world power as, say, Britain or France, right? They're building colonies. They've got a big military. They've shown their power in war. Japan is a force to be reckoned with. And clearly, this is going to lead us ever further and ever closer to Pearl Harbor. All right, one more video, guys, one more topic in this unit, and then we will be done with imperialism.